Medicine, medicine is not only about healing wounds and illnesses, it's about uplifting the whole system of health care and welfare of our people. My name is Essop Jassat. I was inspired to become a medical doctor by people in the community who had contributed for the welfare, the health and the upkeep of my people. The most person who inspired me was Dr. Yusuf Dadu, who was the president of the Transvaal Indian Congress and also was a very prominent member of the Communist Party of South Africa. He, together with other people who did medical work, inspired me to take up medicine as a career. When I qualified from matric, I immediately applied to the University of Witwatersrand to do medicine. There was a quota system in those days. From approximately 400 students, they would take 15 or 20 black students. Black students consisted of Indian, African, Chinese and colored students. And I was very lucky to be selected to do first year medicine at the University of the Witwatersrand in 1951. When I started at the University of Witwatersrand, things were not as pleasant as I expected. There was total segregation. We were not allowed to use the swimming bath. We were not allowed to use the sporting facilities. And there was segregation at social gatherings. And we, in the breaks, would sit on the steps of the university in groups of blacks. Very little intermingling took place with the white students of those days. Some of our friends who lived outside of Johannesburg and who were of the Indian origin had difficulty in traveling from as far away as Pretoria every morning to get to university. There was this residence for African students only, and they would not allow us to stay at that African residence. We felt that the essential matter was that we should continue with our studies in spite of the discrimination that persisted in those days. I must confess that there was quite a lot of sympathy from the lecturers and the fellow students. Though we did not mix socially, they did not deny any rights to sit with them in the lecture halls. I was inspired by Advocate Ismail Mohammed, who was a student at the time, and also by Advocate Bezos. And I noticed that things were not quite started. I had to go to the university. I had to travel in the tram and sit in a separate section. If I traveled to the medical school in the train, there was a special room or class for black travelers. And I felt that there was some unjust system that was at stake. And at medical school, I became involved in the Student Liberal Association, which was trying to help us cope with the dilemma of the apartheid system. And so I became active in the struggle of the people of my country. Following the riots in Natal in 1947, I was asked, there was a plea for the Transvaal Indian Congress for us to come and address leaflets asking for donations for those victims who had suffered in the riots. But after a time, it became too much. So I roped in other colleagues at school, such as my brother Abdullah, Mauzi Mullah, and Farid Adam. And we then joined the Transvaal Indian Congress. Going to the office, we met people like Dr. Yusuf Dadu. Then we met Maulvi Kachalia. We met his brother Essop Kachalia, and we made a very staunch activist. Were then asked to join the Transvaal Indian Congress, Youth Congress, whose task was to do the day-to-day work of the Congress, such as putting up leaflets, doing slogans, and carrying out menial tasks. Going to the Congress offices in Market Street, I came into contact with my African colleagues, friends of the African National Congress. And for the first time, I came into contact with Walter Sisulu, Duma Nokwe, and Mandela. And that inspired me to undertake an understanding of the apartheid system. And this resulted in me becoming very active, and I was promoted to the senior Transvaal Indian Congress. When I started qualified, I started to practice in Germiston and in Fordsburg, and also took a part-time job at Baragwanath. And I was given a casualty officer post there. And during that time, I was then banned from participating in politics for 5 years, and I had to report every Monday to Marshall Square. On one morning, on a Monday, I had a case of heart attack, and I failed to report to the police that morning, and for that I was charged and was sentenced to 10 days imprisonment at the fort. My defense was taken up by Advocate George Bezos. In prison, I mixed with the ordinary prisoners first day, but then they thought that I was a bad influence and I was put into an isolation cell. These isolation cells at the fort here were those which people who were waiting death sentence were kept in, and I was for 14 days.
Panelists. A warm welcome to you this evening to an event hosted by Awqaf to celebrate Dr. Essop Jassat, here on my left, on his biography so eloquently portrayed by the author, Mr. Haroon Aziz, next to him, in this book called The Compassionate Healer. I will be a program coordinator this evening. My name is Shaista Ismail Token, and I am the newly appointed head of operations at Awqaf South Africa. Tonight, we honor one of the stalwarts of South Africa as part of the Leaders and Legacies project. Before we commence the program, kindly oblige by turning off your cell phones or putting it on silent to respect the program. We also endeavor our best to observe the COVID protocol, so if you're comfortable, please keep your mask on. Also, please participate fully in tonight's discussion with our panelists by asking questions later on, as you will be advised. Briefly scanning the book myself, my curiosity immediately piqued when I read about Dr. Jassat's perseverance when he prevailed from the innovation of a health model to counter the prevailing biomedical model in the struggle against diseases and social evils. Now, that was quite interesting. I encourage you all to pay close attention to what the panelists have to say in their tributes with regards to the life of Dr. Jassat. I think you're going to find it very interesting so much that it's going to prompt you to buy this book here this evening. So I would like to now please invite Maulana Ashraf Dokrat, to start the event with an opening dua. As we know, a prayer is a way to invite blessing, peace, and also abundance to any event and any function. And in all religions and all cultures, we embrace the fact that we begin with the name of God.
اللهم لك الحمد كله ولك الشكر كله اللهم لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم. Ya Allah, you accept from us, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, you accept this book and you accept it on behalf of the author. Ya Allah, you accept his efforts. Ya Allah, you guide him in his life and also you guide his pen whenever he writes, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, you guide those people and you accept from those people who were instrumental in publishing this book, the Awqaf Foundation. Ya Allah, you reward them for their efforts to bring this book to light, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, and also, Ya Allah, you bless and you give full reward to Dr. Essop Jassat for his efforts, for his sincerity. And Ya Allah, at the time when we as the Ummah are looking for your assistance and your help, Ya Allah, then we present to you his life and his dedication and his good deeds so that you can bless us and look after us and protect us as a Ummah, Ya Allah. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. اللهم إنا نسألك من كل خير ما سألك منه نبيك وحبيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ونعوذ بك من كل شر ما استعاذك منه نبيك وحبيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. أنت المستعان وعليك البلاغ ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم بفضل سبحان ربك رب العزة أما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Jazakallah, and thank you, Maulana Dokrat, for that. I would like to now request the chairman of the board of Awqaf South Africa, as well as the director at Petrocam, this wonderful and courteous venue that has offered us this event tonight, Mr. Shiraz Gany, to enlighten us on the role of Awqaf South Africa by introducing us to the project of Leaders and Legacies.
Assalamu alaikum to everyone and good evening. To our esteemed guest, Dr. Jassat, the Haroon Aziz, Zainul Kaji, and Vasruti, and all on the panel, including our esteemed guests. Thank you so much for joining us and being part of this commemorative night. Just a little bit of a background on Awqaf South Africa. We are a endowment fund that has been set up on the principles of our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and the aim was post-apartheid was to use a fund which will be able to economically, socially develop communities on a sustainable basis. And one of the funds that we have created is the Leaders and Legacies Fund in Awqaf. And this is one of the contributing factors that has been able to contribute towards funding of the project. The project was commissioned between Awqaf and Haroon Aziz, as well as the Dr. Jassat. And the intention was to be able to write down in history what our leaders have done in the past leaders, the current leaders, and their contributions to enabling us to become a society that we are currently. The struggles that they've gone through, which would be an example for our future leaders. The Awqaf want to congratulate Dr. Jassat on his contribution to our communities at large in terms of the struggles that Dr. Jassat had to go through from the time he was at university, the movement in the pre-apartheid days, which has contributed to many positive outcomes for our society, and including being an inspiration for many leaders that we have currently in place, as well as leaders that we hope to mold into the future. On behalf of Awqaf, I would like to say thank you to Dr. Jassat and the family for allowing us as Awqaf to be part of writing down the history of our leaders. And inshallah, we hope this is an inspiration for many more leaders to come. We encourage everyone to read the book and to also inspire other leaders to also read or the youth to also read this book and use this as an example for their future. Inshallah. Jazakallah.
So from a petroleum guru, now to a South African whose primary discipline is quantum physics, I feel humbled to be in the presence of such legends. Mr. Haroon Aziz, my next guest, is an independent researcher and writer. Having authored another book commissioned by Awqaf South Africa, Life of Social Justice, Mr. Aziz's outreach work includes transferring skills in the writing and research of history and biographies, as well as in developing leadership for freedom from poverty. So before anything else, Mr. Haroon, let's give him a round of applause.
Dr. Jassat, Auntie Shireen, brothers and sisters in the struggle. Greetings of peace to one and all. I will begin by making a short announcement on Dr. Jassat. The most famous peace award in the world is conferred by the Danish Norwegian Parliament, and we all know it's called Nobel Peace Prize. There is an alternative peace prize which is conferred by the Swedish Parliament, and it is called Right Livelihood Award. In 2015, on the basis of this biography, he was nominated and shortlisted for the Right Livelihood Award. Although he did not win, but it was a great honor and an acknowledgement of his role, and also an acknowledgement of one of the greatest sons of South Africa. So it is an honor to have had him shortlisted for the Right Livelihood Award. I will look at two questions mainly. The first one is, what is the primary purpose of a literary biography? This biography is not a political biography or a hagiography. The primary purpose of Dr. Jassat's biography is to explain his character truthfully within a historical context. Secondly, how do we carry forward his unique heritage of altruism? And the second question we will answer towards the end of this short speech. Now let's look at the structure of the biography. One, it is centered on the concept of tarbiyah, which is the development of the whole being of Dr. Jassat. And we treat the concept of tarbiyah as a traditional concept which began 1400 years ago. Tarbiyah also has a modern treatment in neuroscience. Neuroscience has confirmed tarbiyah, where the cortical processes and the thalamic processes of the brain are interpenetrated, and it results in the whole development of the whole being of a human being. So we are looking at both the traditional and the modern treatment of a traditional concept. His development is researched within the historical context of his participation in the dangerous anti-apartheid struggle. Now let's look at the historical background to the concept of tarbiyah. After the historic battle of Uhud, the Quran revealed on March 23rd, year 625 Common Era, 1, the need for the development of the whole being of the human being, which was centered on the management of nafs. Now, nafs we know has multiple meanings, and it is context dependent for its specific meaning. 3, there were 3,000 pagans and 700 Muslim soldiers who took part in the Battle of Uhud. The pagans fought for material possession, control of trade route, and sexual promiscuity. And this was done out of revenge for their defeat at the Battle of Badr 1 year earlier. The Muslims, on the other hand, fought for a spiritual cause, for the purification of the nafs, for freedom and humane values. And the same surah, Surah Nisa, also speaks of the need for human solidarity. Now, Dr. Jassat exemplified both these concepts that we find in Surah Nisa. Let us look at a few nodal points of the development of his character. His courage is traced to age 10 years, when he began fasting. And we all know we begin fasting with a niyat. And that niyat alters us from a mental state of being animals to a mental state of being spiritual beings. So when children begin fasting, it takes a lot of courage, and they are actually learning the art of being courageous in life. 2, the birth of his political consciousness is traced to age 14 years, when his elder brother Muhammad was arrested as a passive resistor in 1946. 3. His commitment to the liberation struggle is traced to the age 16 years, when he entered the liberation movement on January 13, 1949, on the outbreak of the horrible race riots in Durban. 4. His great capacity for compassion is traced to age 19 years, when he definitively chose medicine as his calling and profession as a medical student in 1951. His indefatigable altruism is traced to these 4 nodal points. 1, courage. 2, consciousness. 3, commitment. And 4, compassion. And compassion ultimately became the dominant value of his life. Now let's look at his reading habit. His reading habit is traced to his primary school and madrasa. 2, it was intensified at high school under the influence of his teacher, Mr. P.S. Joshi, who himself was a novelist. Number 3, his reading habit underlined the 4 nodal points of his early childhood and youth development. What were some of the dangers of fighting apartheid? The secret police or special branch persecution of Dr. Jassat resulted in 1, 2 terms of banning order for a total of 10 years. 2, imprisonment without trial for 90 days because he was suspected of making bombs as a BSc student. 3, 2 years imprisonment for breaking his banning order. 4, a charge of high treason with possible death sentence. 5, the disruption of family life, which was ably held together by Auntie Shireen, his wife, and 3 obedient children, Adil, Yumna, and Zahira. Then there was the threat to his livelihood. For example, during the treason trial in the 1980s, his loss of income in his surgery was 100,000 rands. 7, the family as a whole suffered ongoing traumas. Now let's look at Dr. Jassat's altruism. Ethical conduct was central to his altruism, and both are products of one another. They enjoy symbiotic relationship to an extent that many businessmen in Johannesburg and Pretoria, they entrusted him with the distribution of their zakat. Number 2, the substance of his altruism was equal to doing public good with compassion, with revolutionary consciousness, and with great enthusiasm. Number 3, his altruism functioned as his internal motivation that produced excitement for daily living, passion for life, and human warmth. So Dr. Jassat leaves to us his unique heritage of altruism. The question which we need to answer is, how do we carry forward his unique heritage of altruism forward? Before we answer this question, let us examine the ANC in power as distinct from pre-liberation ANC. Let us look at some of the nodal points of ANC in power. Number 1, its abandonment of RDP, which was the ANC's social compact with its members and the people and its political program of action in government. Number two, the ANC's adoption of IMF's structural adjustment program called GEAR, which cut down on social spending and the wider distribution of the social wage. Number three, GEAR deepened poverty, joblessness, hunger, illiteracy, homelessness, physical and mental ill health, and failed to attract the promised FDI. Number four, GEAR converted a legitimate democracy to a neoliberal democracy. Number five, GEAR converted the apartheid colonial state to a neo-colonial state. Number six, apartheid set in the alienation of the masses from the ANC government. Seven, alienation set in social discontent and political anger of the masses. Number eight, a new political bureaucratic class formed amongst ANC leaders who were divided into fractions with their own competing interests above those of the masses. Nine, this resulted in increasing corruption of power. Now let's look at the nodal points in ANC's corruption of power. ANC's corruption of power began in the year 1965-1966 at the ANC headquarters in London. Number two, this corruption in London resulted in conflict of interest between the New Londoners and MK soldiers at Kongwa military camp in Tanganyika, which is now Tanzania. Number three, the New Londoners pronounced death sentence on Comrade Chris Hani and punished MK soldiers by forcing them to stand in the open pits of toilets, to cite just two examples. Number four, and I repeat, the abandonment of RDP and the adoption of GEAR. Number five, the secret deals between ANC and apartheid leaders before and during CODESA, especially the ANC agreement to pay off apartheid's obnoxious debts, which were used to build a military power to kill blacks. Number six, the secret deal between the Transitional Executive Committee, which was hidden within CODESA, and the Bureau of Economic Research at Stellenbosch. Number seven, the notorious arms deal covered up by the discredited Seriti Commission of Inquiry. Number eight, the abuse of the RSA Constitution at presidential level to protect a single South African citizen. There is irrefutable evidence of this corruption of constitutional power at the Gauteng High Court, at the SCA, and in De Rebus, the Lawyers' Journal. And soon it will appear at the Constitutional Court led by Comrade Imtiaz Kaji. Number nine, the abuse led to the proliferation of units, rogue units in NPA and Scorpions. Number 10, it further empowered ultra-secretive rogue units in SSA to abuse illegal and financial power with greater impunity. Number 8, it created space for a private company to take total control of all public prisons. Number 12, two eminent judges who were legally associated with the prisons were in snooze mode and lacked the political will and legal will to stop the private company. Now, there are two big constitutional questions. One, had there been no abuse of the RSA constitution by a state president, would there have been a need for the ultra-expensive Zondo Commission? Number two, why did the Constitutional Court justices lack the legal and political will to call the state president to order? Let's look at the July 2021 riots. Had there been no abuse of the RSA constitution by another state president in defense of his retention of power, would there have been the July 2021 riots? Now, the breakdown in the rule of law has been quantified in many respects in terms of losses and damages. But what could not be quantified was the psychological damages to the emotional state of the minds of the people. There were undertones and overtones of racism, ethnicism, tribalism, clanism, male chauvinism, xenophobia, vigilantism, and increase in GBV. In response to similar violence in 1990, President Mandela said, and I quote, "My message to those of you involved in this battle of brother against brother is this: take your guns, your pangas, and your weapons and throw them into the sea. Close down the death factories, end the war." In departing from his prepared text, he said that he could not understand why Africans killed Africans. Now, there was some historical corrections made after the July riots. Before and during the July riots, there was no coordination of the strategic ministries of intelligence, police, army, which internally imperiled the rule of law that resulted in public violence as a failed state. Finally, let us look at how do we carry forward Dr. Jassat's altruism. And this poses challenges to the youth, not only in South Africa, but in the world. Number one, to reconfigure the changing dynamics of organizational politics. Two, to continue the struggle against neocolonialism, imperialism, and Zionism. Three, to fight with knowledge, creativity, and ability to take risk. Five, to mobilize the youth in South Africa and the 1.5 billion youth of the world. Six, to promote peace, safety, and security. Finally, as a biographer, I'm amazed at Dr. Jassat's character, because Dr. Jassat has served the liberation movement for 73 unbroken years without any compassion fatigue. Lastly, only the youth can carry Dr. Jassat's unique heritage of altruism into the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aziz. We are going to take a short break for Salah and reconvene in 15 minutes. The facilities provided to my left through the door is a small namaz room. So we'll start with the gentlemen that want to pray first, and then followed by the ladies who would like to pray. Okay, we appreciate your patience in this time, but I think we're going to go ahead with the gentleman first, please.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Because of the isolation, I lost something like 10 kilograms of weight. When I was released, I returned to my practice, and of course the bending order continued. Medicine is not only about healing wounds and illnesses, it's about uplifting the whole system of health care and welfare of our people. My name is Essop Jassat. I was inspired to become a medical doctor by people in the community who had contributed for the welfare, the health, and the upkeep of my people. The most person who inspired me was Dr. Yusuf Dadu, who was the president of the Transvaal Indian Congress and also was a very prominent member of the Communist Party of South Africa. He, together with other people who did medical work, inspired me to take up medicine as a career. When I qualified from matric, I immediately applied to the University of Witwatersrand to do medicine. There was a quota system in those days. From approximately 400 students, they would take 15 or 20 black students. Black students consisted of Indian, African, Chinese, and colored students. And I was very lucky to be selected to do first year medicine at the University of the Witwatersrand in 1951. When I started at the University of Witwatersrand, things were not as pleasant as I expected. There was total segregation. We were not allowed to use the swimming bath. We were not allowed to use the sporting facilities. And there was segregation at social gatherings. And we, in the breaks, would sit on the steps of the university in groups of blacks. Very little intermingling took place with the white students of those days. Some of our friends who lived outside of Johannesburg and who were of the Indian origin had difficulty in traveling from as far away as Pretoria every morning to get to university. There was this residence for African students only, and they would not allow us to stay at that African residence. We felt that the essential matter was that we should continue with our studies in spite of the discrimination that persisted in those days. I must confess that there was quite a lot of sympathy from the lecturers and the fellow students. though we do not mix socially, they did not deny any rights to sit with them in the lecture halls. I was inspired by Advocate Ismail Muhammad, who was a student at the time, and also by Advocate Bezos. And I noticed that things were not quite straight. I had to go to the university. I had to travel in the tram and sit in a separate section. If I traveled to the medical school in the train, there was a special room or class for black travelers, and I felt that there was some unjust system that was at stake. And at medical school, I became involved in the Students' Liberal Association, which was trying to help us cope with the dilemma of the apartheid system. And so I became active in the struggle of the people of my country. Following the riots in Natal in 1947, I was asked, there was a plea for the Transvaal Indian Congress for us to come and address leaflets asking for donations for those victims who had suffered in the riots. But after a time, it became too much. So I wrote in other colleagues at school, such as my brother Abdullah, Mauzi Mullah, and Farid Adam, and we then joined the Transvaal Indian Congress. Going to the office, we met people like Dr. Yusuf Dadu, then we met Maulvi Kachalia, we met his brother Essop Kachalia, and we met a very staunch activist, Ahmad Kasrada, and we were then asked to join the Transvaal Indian Congress, Youth Congress, whose task was to do the day-to-day work of the Congress, such as putting up leaflets, doing slogans, and carrying out menial tasks. Going to the Congress offices in Market Street, I came into contact with my African colleagues, friends of the African National Congress. And for the first time, I came into contact with Walter Sisulu, Duma Nokwe, and Mandela. And that inspired me to undertake an understanding of the apartheid system. And this resulted in me becoming very active, and I was promoted to the senior Transvaal Indian Congress. When I started qualified, I started to practice in Germiston and in Fordsburg, and also took a part-time job at Baragwanath. And I was given a casualty officer post there. And during that time, I was then banned from participating in politics for 5 years, and I had to report every Monday to the prison, to Marshall Square. On one morning, on a Monday, I had a case of heart attack and I failed to report to the police that morning. And for that I was charged and was sentenced to 10 days imprisonment at the fort. My defense was taken up by Advocate George Bezos. In prison, I was mixed. I mixed with the ordinary prisoners first day, but then they thought that I was a bad influence, and I was put into an isolation cell. These isolation cells at the fort here were those which people who were waiting death sentence were kept in, and I was for 14 days put in those cells. I was in that few days, because of the isolation, I lost something like 10 kilograms of weight. When I was released, I returned to my practice, and of course the banning order continued, which prevented me from leaving the suburb of or the town of Johannesburg. There was security on my movement frequently. I would have patients coming in to my rooms quite late in the evening, and what would happen is that the police would come in and ask why they would come into my surgery to find out why they were present and not at that time of the day. When I got married in 1983, police attended my wedding at the mosque in Kirk Street, and they also attended the reception which was held at the Planet Hotel in Fortsburg. Fortunately, my friends did a function for me at a private hall in Friedrichsdorf at night, where those who could not be present at the wedding were invited, and met my wife and myself that day. With the advent of the new system, I was nominated to stand for Parliament in the Fortsburg Newtown area, and I was elected to the first Parliament on which I served for 10 years. In Parliament, I was also appointed by President Mandela to the Integrity Committee, and on which I served, and I had the fortune to be on the Health and Welfare Committee. On the Health was Mantu Shabalala, followed by Dr. Zuba, and then on the Welfare Committee I played a very pivotal role while my stay in Parliament. In 2013, I was awarded the Order of Lutuli in Silver by President Zuma for my participation in the struggle against apartheid. Medicine is not only about healing wounds and illnesses, it's about uplifting the whole system of health care and welfare of our people. One must think of it as a service to the people of this country. It must not be seen as one of gathering wealth and getting lovely cars and homes. It must be seen as a dedication to humanity. And that is what I appeal to the young people who are qualified now to serve our wonderful people in this land. Medicine is not only about healing wounds and illnesses, it's about uplifting the whole system of health care and welfare of our people. My name is Essop Jassat. I was inspired to become a medical doctor by people in the community who had contributed for the welfare, the health, and the upkeep of my people. The most person who inspired me was Dr. Yusuf Dadu, who was the president of the Transvaal Indian Congress and also was a very prominent member of the Communist Party of South Africa. He, together with other people who did medical work, inspired me to take up medicine as a career. When I qualified from matric, I immediately applied to the University of Witwatersrand to do medicine. There was a quota system in those days. From approximately 400 students, they would take 15 or 20 black students. Black students consisted of Indian, African, Chinese, and colored students. And I was very lucky to be selected to do first year medicine at the University of the Witwatersrand in 1951. When I started at the University of Witwatersrand, things were not as pleasant as I expected. There was total segregation. We were not allowed to use the swimming bath. We were not allowed to use the sporting facilities. And there was segregation at social gatherings. And we, in the breaks, would sit on the steps of the university in groups of blacks. Very little intermingling took place with the white students of those days. Some of our friends who lived outside of Johannesburg and who were of the Indian origin had difficulty in traveling from as far away as Pretoria every morning to get to university. There was this residence for African students only, and they would not allow us to stay at that African residence. We felt that the
Essop Jassat. We're going to start with Mr. N.G. Patel. So Mr. Patel is not only a lawyer, he served on the executive council that goes back to the TIC when Gauteng was Transvaal. And he was also a batchmate at university with Dr. Essop Jassat. So we're in for some lovely tales from Mr. N.G. Patel. Can you give him a round of applause, please?
Dr. Jassat and friends. What can I say about Dr. Jassat? It's like repeating to you parts of my life. We've belonged to a lot of organizations between us. Nobody's spoken about, well, there's the Congress thing, and we've both been involved. Not me as much as he is, but I was there. I was a follower. But let me tell you about a person I know. I mean, I've known him for over 60 years. He was a close friend of my partner, Said Kachalia, and that's how I came to know him very well. And I came to know the Jassat family at the same time. His elder brother, Truman Jassat, was a good friend of mine also. Now, let me tell you about the different organizations we belong to. Well, there's the ANC thing, but I've never been that important official in the ANC. But I can quite clearly tell you, and I understand the complaints we have about corruption and all that, but Essop Jassat has served in the ANC and in the political world with great integrity. There is, we can talk about it, about corruption and all that, but it's got nothing to do with Dr. Jassat. And we need to understand that. And it's the same thing that applies to Praveen Gordhan in the same way, that you can't, and one can understand, and I want you to look at it a little differently. What exactly? When you brought up in an organization, when you were 20, 18 to 20, and you've grown with it, when you knew Sisulu, when you knew Mandela, when you knew many others, Duma Nokwe and others, one can't just walk away from it because now there is corrupt people in it. And we Indians should understand this very clearly. The Indian parliament is full of corrupt people. Half of them got long sentences and charges. We all know that. We hear it on NDTV. So let's not, but none of this touches my friend Dr. Jassat. Now, and that's something that applies to others who also carried on in the ANC. I must say that it's a very difficult question to decide whether you're going to walk away and say it's corrupt, or whether you're going to stay there and try and change it, or try your little bit, because all of us can only do a little bit. We can't change a country. We're not that powerful. We're going to be a minority as an Indian group in this country forever. And we need to understand that we need to understand our African people. We need to talk their language. We need to interact with them, which we've never done. Really, when we think about it, we are also at a lot of fault in this regard. I can't speak Zulu, I can't speak Xhosa, I can't speak anything. I mean, how do you understand a person if you don't know his language? How many of us sitting here can say that I can speak Xhosa or Zulu, which is the two major tribes in South Africa? So let's leave that. We as a firm, N.G. Patel, Kachalia and Lunat, had defended Dr. Jassat throughout all the different charges that were brought to him. And even in the treason trial in Pietermaritzburg, we were the instructing attorneys for Dr. Jassat and the late Mr. Saluji. And one needs to understand that is it. But let's talk about the person who was in the community. I think because he was in Fordsburg at 13 Bree Street, and he lived in a building which was Crown Heights, but which was called Aryan Nivas in the old days. He was there for so many years that every Hindu family living in there knew him. And not only knew him, they regarded him as somebody who is their friend. Crown Road also was like that. And let's also remember, and a lot of us might recollect this, that in my days when I was in the Oriental Plaza, I was a neighbor to Dr. Munshi. And there was Dr. Jassat practicing at 13 Bree Street. And a lot of times friends came there and I asked them, what are you doing here? So he says, no, the father was just seeing Dr. Munshi. Now, twice or thrice, the person who brought their father was the doctor himself, because the person had more faith in Dr. Munshi and in the same way in Dr. Jassat. The two of them ruled that area for a long time. And we all know that. I mean, whatever else, we may not agree with Dr. Munshi or anything else, but he was my neighbor, and I know that one must accept that they had a standing in the community. Dr. Jassat attends every funeral. And we all know that because somebody or the other has died and touched us. There is this point that I personally can remember, that I was sitting in some architect's office when my family phoned me and said, my father is not in a good condition anymore. Well, he might die. What happened? What happened is that I phoned Dr. Jassat, and he was at my home before me. So he was there when my father died, at home, in the room. He was the same when my mother died. At 12 o'clock, there was Said Kachalia and Dr. Jassat still staying there, and we were discussing how we're going to feed her when she decided she didn't want to be fed and left. Now, one has these stories. I mean, the most interesting one, which I must tell you, and then sit down because I've been told I got 3 minutes, is this one, that he once told me that he was sitting in an airport in Mexico, when somebody approached him and looked at him. Now you must know that this is in Mexico. Looked at him and said, "You Dr. Jassat." And then he said, "You did my sunat." Now, I'm trying to tell you, all right, let's call that off. Let me tell you about the organizations. We've been together in Jiswa. And I don't need to tell you a lot about Jiswa, but for 57 or 58 years, we've been together. We've been together in the anti-psych and all the Congress activities. Not that as I said, I'm his follower. And we've been involved in these things. I mean, this Mexico thing I just couldn't believe it. But there it is. He attends every funeral. He gets that urge. And that's why the word compassionate in his case is very clear. But he has this ability to understand. And the medical thing, we must accept that he was a great whatever you call it. What do you say? Diagnosis. He could tell you what's wrong with you. Let's put it that way. Many other doctors couldn't tell you what's wrong with you. But if you went to him, he had that experience and that ability to say what's wrong with you. And we all know that. Our family knows that. So let's remember that it's the personal touch. It's the person we know. And he's unique in that regard. Many leaders are, well, what can one say, full of themselves. But Dr. Jassat isn't that. He doesn't think, he's a humble person. He doesn't think that he's higher than you or he knows more than you. He treats you on the same level as he is. And that's all I want to say, that he's the best human being I've come across in this community.
That was amazing, Mr. Patel. Thank you so much for that tribute to Dr. Jassat. As you see, there's friends here tonight that bring the humanness forward of this great man who's really dedicated his life to humanity as well. I think I'm going to hire Dr. Patel for my eulogy. Our next speaker Mr. Ismail Wadi, sorry, is no stranger. Is he doctor? Okay, Dr. Ismail Wadi is no stranger to media as a former MP and the MEC of Roads and Transport, Gauteng. Mr. Wadi also lectured at the Faculty of Education at the Wits University, and he's very eager to take my place on.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening to everybody. What a pleasure it is to talk about Dr. Essop Jassat, Auntie Shirin, Abdullah, Halin, and the Jassat family. So, Angie Patel has brought about the human element, but I want to just briefly talk about the 72 or 73 years of his political involvement in his activism. Today in this country, there are very, very few people that can say they have been 7 decades in the struggle for freedom and democracy. He's one of them. And the fact that he's with us, we say he's a living legend. So from 1949 roughly to, let's say, 1964, Doctor was involved in the Transvaal Indian Youth Congress, in the SRC at Wits, in USS. So it's the youthful activism, the young person in him. But all the major campaigns of that decade, the Defiance Campaign, the Congress of the People, Doctor participated in those campaigns. And today, I think he holds the distinctive honor of possibly being one or two of the remaining people who spoke at the Congress of the People. There are very, very few people, probably 30 or 40 people spoke in the entire Congress of the People for that Saturday or Sunday on the 25th and 26th of June, 1955. Dr. Jassat had the honor, and I say the distinctive honor, of being the person who spoke in support of the education clause in the Freedom Charter. Now, that is a unique honor that we must remember as a community and as a people. In the 60s, when the armed struggle took place, Dr. Essop worked in an auxiliary capacity. He brought his medical skills to bear to support those that were injured, some of the comrades who were ill, who were in Mkonto, etc., who were in the underground. His surgery was used to store, without his knowledge maybe, but Abdullah must take responsibility for that, for storing dynamite in his office. Okay, so I mean that's the thing. When the moment came, Dr. Jassat won't kill a fly. I can tell you, his humanity was such. We've heard that from Angie Patel. But for the man to come to a point in the history of this country where he was prepared to endorse and support the armed struggle, talks about the political development and the maturity and growth of a genuine, soft, kind-hearted person, such as Dr. Jassat. Then he was banned for 10 years, and that disrupted his social life, his political life, his community life, his family life, and I'm sure Prema and other people will talk about that. But in the 70s, when we started becoming young activists, and we had this big fight with the Black consciousness movement, ideological struggle, etc., we wanted to reclaim the tradition, or recover, or discover maybe the tradition of the Congress movement. Because from the mid-60s to around the late 70s, it was really the Black consciousness movement that emerged as a new force in the country, particularly amongst young people. We turned to Dr. Jassat for that inspiration, for that leadership. Abdullah and others were in exile, but it was Dr. Jassat and Maulvi Ismail Sadoji, who was the last president of the TIC when Dr. Dadu went into exile. I remember there was a building where the Afro Middle East Center had the offices in Mint Road. It's an old building, and they're not there anymore. But we had an activist workshop. Prema was there, Momo, a number of us, and we approached him to say, Doctor, after the Transvaal Anti-Psych Committee campaign, for presidency of the TIC, we think it's you. You stand out as the leader, as the role model, as the symbol of Congress politics in this country. So, of course, I mean, people will talk about the treason trial, and we will probably speak about that. But then when Doctor came to Parliament, I mean, what an honor. You know, this older generation, Kathy Isuchiba, Dr. Albertina Sisulu, Rita Inzanga, these old comrades, Bertha Grover, who were in Parliament. I mean, they were quite elderly already. They would be there on time when the bells ring, and they would be the last to leave when the House adjourns. When many of the youngsters, and sometimes even myself, we'll make a duck to say, "Hey, it's getting boring in the house, let's go and do something else." But this is the discipline. This is the discipline of the person. So the 10 years in Parliament, I had the very unique honor of, because we used to travel, come back together on a Thursday night or Friday night from Parliament. And I would drop him off at his house, sometimes late at night. I would drop off Dr. Rashid Saluji because he had left Lands, but when he was in Lands, I would drop off Dr. Kachalia, and sometimes even the late Professor Ismail Mohammed in the Bosmont area, because they depended on us on transport. But that was a labor of love. It was a unique thing, just to be with all these veterans in the same car, and we gossip. And these guys can gossip, I can tell you. There are a lot of old stories that come out. Who was jollying who and all that from the 50s. A lot of stories would come out. And that's what I enjoyed. Just the reminiscing, because the hard history, I'm a historian by profession, so the hard history we'll read and we'll find out. But it's really the Panchat, that brought life to the politics of the 50s. And then in his retirement, he continued with his practice. All the various organizations, CIT, JESWA, there's any NEMDA, the medical fraternity, Santa, there's any number of associations, Cancer Society, Doctor participated in those. But today, in spite of his age, he still holds a very influential position in the ANC. He serves on the Integrity Commission of the ANC. These are the trusted leaders of our movement who are supposed to be sitting almost in judgment of those who are deviating, those who are losing their way. He sits and says, "Come here, what's happening here? Can you tell us what's going wrong here?" But he doesn't talk about it. That is a mark of his humility. So for us as younger activists, it's a great pride that we have a leader of this caliber.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ismail. I now call upon Mr. Mohammed Enver Surthi, who also served as an MP, who was a negotiator of the Bill of Rights, but I admire him mostly for his role as the Deputy Minister of Education as an educator myself.
Assalamu alaikum, good evening, Dumelang, namaste. Well, it's indeed a great pleasure and privilege to be here to celebrate and pay tribute to an extraordinary man. And we've all spoken about it. I've listened attentively to our veteran NG Patel. He would not remember me. I was probably about 19 years old when I started serving articles with AK Mia. And the most established practice in the Black community was NG Patel, Mia Lunat, and Said Kachalia. So I know him from that time. He doesn't remember me, obviously. I tried to emulate Abdullah. I also brought my walking sticker over here, my crutch, to say, well, at least I can be like them, even if I'm not anything near them, But I got to know Dr. Jassat, and I take this from NG, when I was a few months old. That's the first time we met each other. I then, as an infant, saw him visiting my grandmother in 29812 Street, the Nana family. And then as a toddler, I accompanied my mother to 3 Street surgery, where we would collect tickets. Auntie Shireen, you were there, isn't it? Distributing it. And you'd be so waiting. Every patient took an enormous long period of time with Dr. Jassat. And I only understood when he saw me personally, took his diagnosis had to be correct because he took your blood pressure, tested your urine, just did everything, your temperature and everything else with patience, with kindness, with compassion. But it didn't stop there, I then got married, and for the antenatal treatment, my wife went to him. And I thought it would stop then, and she gave birth. And postnatal, my daughter went to him. 4 generations of service to the Surti family. Quite extraordinary. And at all times, patient, kind, compassionate, and humble. Now, this is an extraordinary element or aspect of the person's life, that for 73 years, I have still to come across somebody who said that his circumcision was not done correctly. Yes, for 73 years. And I discovered when I went to Parliament that every Muslim representative from the former Transvaal was circumcised by Dr. Jassat. I had no choice but to assign to him the title Dr. Pipi Sneema. Sorry, but that's what he is. He was a champion. But what is Dr. Jassat all about? And is this humility, this inspiration that he brought to all of us? I think he influenced us in so many ways to say that, look, you never know enough. You have to be humble at all times. You have to recognize that the opportunities that you have in politics or in any other field is a privilege. And therefore, you have to be accessible to people and ensure that you are neither arrogant about your ability, nor are you condescending. And it's these attributes that he passed on to a generation of activists, young activists. And I'm grateful for it. I remember as a member of parliament, I was a chief whip at that time, and I lived in Rustenburg, and I would travel with my daughters, and they would drop me off there. And there was Dr. Jassat. Auntie Shireen was always there, ready with the samosas, with the tea. So before we go to the airport, that's what we would receive out there. Adil would take us to the airport, and it was all with kindness and happiness. And the usual passengers were Rem Saluji, Dr. Jassat, Isu Chiba from time to time, and I would sit in the front seat with Adil. But the social banter was just incredible. I mean, really, it was about everything and anything and about everybody, but it was so wonderful to be with them. You know, Ismail has spoken about his political life, and I obviously would have to speak for much longer. But what comes to mind is a single incident. And we had the privilege of having to do a biography of Dr. Quresh Patel and myself on Chief Justice Ismail Mohammed. And we had to do a chapter, obviously, because it was the second longest trial in the country, the Pietermaritzburg trial, and I would imagine it's in this book as well. And we start off that chapter by referring to a particular incident. That's the beginning of the chapter because it was so important. We indicated here that the prosecutor who persecuted the very many trialists, and amongst the trialists that was there was the late Kasim Saluji, Frank Chikani, Albertina Sisulu, Mewa Ramgovan, and many, many other activists. And as the trial commenced, and they had been in custody for a long time, bail was applied for, and ultimately they got bail of 100,000 rands, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Jassat, would that be correct? And he's sitting here, and the trial is about to start, and the prosecutor then collapses, faints. And Dr. Jassat rushes from the bench, from the dock, to support that prosecutor. Not because he's an enemy, but because he's a human being. And he's compelled by a basic humanity to respect and to basically make a difference in the lives of people, to respect, to ensure that he promotes the well-being of others. So the doctor's oath was never compromised in terms of his political activity. Now that's a unique situation. Priscilla Jana talks about it, and I imagine the writer talks about it in his book as well. And those who had been in the trial said, what a remarkable person. In fact, Albertina Sisulu was so flabbergasted to see Dr. Jassat run to the assistance of a prosecutor who's going to be persecuting these people out there. Maybe that act of kindness made it very, very easy. All the people who were charged were found not guilty and discharged, and they said one of the most brilliant displays of cross-examination by Ismail Mohammed was an expert witness called De Vries. Now, if I were to say what stands out for me, firstly, at the professional level, the ability to interact with people, to do so with kindness and compassion, to be very professional, and certainly his diagnosis was really spot on all occasions. So this steady hand. The second, in terms of, as a roundup, the second was in terms of his political beliefs. He was steadfast in his principles, unwavering, would not acquiesce, would not move from a committed position in terms of our struggle for our freedom in our democracy. That is the consistency. The third element, and it's an important element, is basically his humanity, and that embraces his humility, his care, his compassion, and all the attributes that make him the kind of person that our veteran, Mr. N.G. Patel, speaks about, that makes him unique and extraordinary. So I could go on forever, but there are other panelists who are going to speak. But Dr. Jassat, to you, I say thank you very much for the service to the nation and your continued service. To Auntie Shireen, to Adil, to Yumna and Zaira, if I'm not mistaken, and to Abdullah. Thank you for the support that you've provided, and of course, to Dr. Jassat. It's not, I saw you in the surgery, I saw you at home. During his difficult times, the family stood with him, and I think that's a remarkable strength that you provided. So the nation owes not only to thanks to Dr. Jassat, but also to his family. Thank you for being with him.
I think such an appropriate title to a book, The Compassionate Healer. As you heard from the panelists, you know, mashallah, Dr. Jassat had such a wonderful life, but also so much of giving and so much of sharing. Our next panelist, Mr. Prema Naidu, was a member of the ANC who played an active role in the formation of the UDF. He is presently a board member at the Amit Kathrada Foundation. Amit Kathrada, I'm pleased to say, was also the person who wrote the foreword to this particular book. Mr. Prema.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and really I don't deserve that. Good evening to everybody. Dr. Jassat and his wife Shireen, his brother Abdullah, and Aline. My family, the Naidu family, we were known as Congress Naidus, and the Jassat family go back a long way. Dr. Jassat, although my father was much older than him, he knew my father. And what I want to talk about, Dr. Jassat and Abdullah and probably NG were members of the Transvaal Indian Youth Congress. And I'm sure Aline was also very much part of it. The Transvaal Indian Youth Congress, as what Walter Sisulu said, was one of the most dynamic movements within the Congress movement. And Dr. Jassat was part of every campaign that was run by the TIC. Obviously, the major campaigns was the Group Areas Act. There was the potato boycott. There was the cigarette boycott. And there were many, many boycotts, and Dr. Jassat was very much part of it. We lived in Doornfontein, as I said. Dr. Jassat lived in Fordsburg. He's our family doctor. He used to come all the way to our family home to treat the family at no charge, all the way from Fordsburg. I know I don't have too much time, but I just want to say a few things about Dr. Jassat during the underground days. Dr. Jassat was a terrorist. He was in the underground movement. When the ANC leadership and the South African Communist Party leadership were hiding in Ravonia, Lily's Leaf, and there were people there who were quite elderly, and they needed medical treatment. It was Dr. Jassat, the compassionate healer, who went to treat them. And you must understand this was in very dangerous times. Only the most trusted and loyal people knew about this. And Dr. Jassat went to Lily's Leaf on many occasions to treat some of the leadership that was there. On another occasion, we were living in very different times. Today you can Google how to make a bomb. But those days, it was trial and error. You had to learn. Amin Kaji and Mac Maharaj were given some wet dynamite. And in their wisdom, they took the dynamite, they put it in the oven to dry. And how will it be? The dynamite exploded, and Amin Kaji was severely burnt. And it was Dr. Jassat who, they lived in Doornfontein in a house where Mac was renting, and it was Dr. Jassat who went there and treated. And nobody knew that story until we all came out, until we were free. So this is the kind of work Dr. Jassat was banned for 10 years, has been mentioned. And after his banning, when we launched the anti-psych movement, Dr. Jassat was elected as the president or the chairperson of the anti-psych movement. Dr. Jassat, myself, Kadir Saluji, we traveled the length and breadth of the old Transvaal, persuading people not to vote. Dr. Jassat, I'm sure you'll remember some of those trips that we went to, the trips to Ermelo, to Middelburg, you name it, we went together and we campaigned. And when that election took place, less than 15% of our community voted. And that was a show of force and a show of support that we had. We then revived the Transvaal Indian Congress, and Dr. Jassat was elected as president. Then too, we went door to door with Dr. Jassat. We went to many, many campaigns, and I must mention this. I know the hospitality of Shireen and Dr. Jassat in their flat, their tiny little flat. After every campaign or every meeting, we used to go to that flat, and it used to be packed. And the lovely savories that Shireen made, the samosas, the pies, tea, and the coffee, and we indulged in it. And what I want to say is that the compassionate healer played a massive role in our struggle for liberation in this country. And I am honored to have spoken here. I'm honored to know the Jassat family for all these years, and I speak on behalf of my whole family. All of us at one point or another interacted with Dr. Jassat as a comrade. We interacted him as a friend, and he treated us as a doctor. So I want to take this opportunity to thank the Awqaf Foundation for giving me an opportunity to say a few words. Thank you very much to you all.
Thank you so much, Mr. Naidu. Our last panelist for today is Mr. Nishan Bolton. He is the Executive Director of the Amit Katraja Foundation. Mr. Bolton has also been a community and political activist for the past 35 years. So as you've noticed, all our panelists here today, and I promised you it was entertaining, they all have a specific relationship and a special relationship with Dr. Jassat. So our last panelist, Dr. Bolton. Mr. Bolton.
No, thanks for the title. Hopefully it will come at some point. Doc, what a privilege. What a privilege and honor. Kathrada writes in his memoirs about the need to have a permit to travel through the Free State. He says Indians wishing to travel from one province to another for any reason and length of time required a special permit. Failure to produce one was a criminal offense. And then he goes on to say that people in the Free State had never seen an Indian, but this didn't stop them from subscribing to the myth that we were thugs and ogres at best, cannibals at worst. And then he writes about, he says, I've been traveling without permits for many years, but for the first time I ran into trouble in this regard was in 1953 in the Eastern Cape town of Uitenhage. Essop Jassat and I had gone to represent the Indian Youth Congress at a joint meeting of the executives of the South African Youth Congress and the ANC Youth League. During a break, we stepped outside the hall and I was promptly accosted by a security policeman, Sergeant Mini, who politely asked if I had a permit to be in the Cape Province. Of course I did not, but I managed to whisper hurriedly to Essop that he should say he was Malay. Since this group was officially classified as colored, the travel rules did not apply to them. To our surprise, many accepted Essop's claim without question. So when you became president of the TIC, what was the race classification that enabled you to become president of the TIC? I think the book describes the relationship between Doc and Kathy. But five years ago, on the 4th of March, Dr. Jassat, Lalu Chiba, Dr. Chami Saluji, Dr. Natalia Dinat, Yasmin Kathrada, Ismail Vadi, and myself were called by Kathy to say, look, I have to go in for surgery at 6 o'clock, but it's not a decision I want to make myself. Why he thought it necessary to convene the Congress of the People to take that decision, I don't know. But that was his character. And he convened all of us, specifically insisting that Doc needed to be there. I mean, I would know nothing about the scans that were being shown by Professor Omar. But after we saw the scans, Doc, Dr. Saluji, and others, they agreed that that operation had to be done. And as you all know, by the 28th of March, Kathy then died. Every year that we've gathered at the gravesite since then, Doc's presence has been amongst the most special. And I've been looking at the photographs today. You see the pain when he stands at that graveside to pay tribute to his friend, to his comrade, to his brother. And from the book, you see the political relationship. And that kind of friendship you will not find very easily today. Transcends, and you've heard the Skinner story, so I'm not going to go into it. But I also want to thank you for the leadership of the TIC. For young people like myself, you gave us the confidence and the courage to do things that I don't think we thought were possible. But we knew you were there. We knew Ram was there, and we knew Lalu was there when he came out, that Reggie was there. And that so long as you were there, we knew we were doing the right thing. We might not have understood the intricacies of the system, but if you said it was wrong, it was wrong. And that is why we followed you. The TIC was our gateway into the non-racial politics. It was our gateway into the ANC and to MK and all kinds of things. And if you had not been leading that, I doubt many of us would have followed. When I was dismissed as a teacher in 1988, the TIC were just generous. They gave me a check of 5,000 and said, look, this must get you through. You can't believe what that meant for a family that had to now deal with their son having gone to university, now being fired, not knowing what's going to happen. Their hopes and dreams and financial support was just shattered. And here came this money. And I think I was earning about 1,500 or so. So this was 3 or 4 months' salary. That was as a major cushion. And I think it's because of your influence over the TIC to have said, when one of our own suffers, we have to step in. And that's something that I will always appreciate. But I must also apologize today. I think our youthful arrogance at the time brought us to the wrong conclusions. I was amongst many of those who said, shut this TIC down. Shut it down because the ANC will be our organization to fulfill our non-racial dreams. We didn't understand that there was a need to transition. There was a need to do things in a different way. And that there were too many competing issues that this big movement would have to deal with. We did not close that organization down with the dignity that it deserved. Ismail is busy writing the book on the TIC. I know my chapter is outstanding. But I'm hoping that when we conclude that book, Doc will still be around for us to launch it. And perhaps in that way, to give the TIC the dignified closure that it deserves as a special tribute to you and your generation that I think opened the way for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our panelists. I think they all deserve a round of applause. I would like to call upon Mr. Haroon Kala to present a gift to Mrs. Shireen Patel Jassat. I think it's only deserving that Mrs. Jassat received this frame from Mr. Kala on behalf of her role in the struggle and her support as a wife. As they say, behind every successful man is a supportive woman. Yes. And Mr. Haroon Aziz, if you can also go. Inshallah.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for Shireen. I also enjoyed the samosas a few years ago when we were discussing it. So,
Okay, I'd like to call upon Mr. Shiraz Gany and Mr. Zainul Kaji from Awqaf South Africa to hand out gifts to our panelists for their time, but also for their valuable contribution to the event. I think it's rightfully said that each and every person here was of benefit, not only to the country. So as a child from the 80s, early 80s, let me tell you, I thank you all for what you've given me as a South African woman here today. Okay, so our first gift is for Mr. Prema Naidu. Then we have Mr. N.G. Patel. Dr. Ismail Wadi. Mr. Enver Surti. Mr. Nishan Bolton. And if I could call Mr. Kala one more time to present a gift to none other than the legend, the hero, and the honor of tonight, Dr. Essop Jassat. Yeah. I won't divulge too many details because you've heard quite a bit already about this political and medical veteran. You will now have to buy the book to know more about him apart from these personal narratives so that you can explore more about his personal life. As a devotee to the service of humanity for over 70 years in South Africa, he has been not only an Umkhonto Sizwe member, but also an MP for a decade. So before giving him a round of applause, I have his grandson, Essop Jassat, who's going to say a few words as a representative of the family on his behalf.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening to all. On behalf of my grandfather, he would like to thank his family, friends, colleagues, and comrades for attending the launch of The Compassionate Healer, the biography written by Haroon Aziz. He is grateful for the lens that Haroon went through to research the community, history, and the role played by my grandfather in the struggle against apartheid, inequality, and racism. Special thanks to Awqaf for the sponsoring, writing, and publishing of the biography, especially to Akhtar Token and Haroon Kala. He expresses immense gratitude to his late parents, Ishaq and Khatija, who provided both deen and secular education and were pivotal in raising him and his younger brother Abdulhay under challenging circumstances. In addition, a huge debt of gratitude to his late brother Muhammad for enabling him to pursue tertiary education. Finally, thanks to his loyal and caring wife Shireen, who provided support through challenging and difficult times. To his loving children, Yumna, Zahira, and Adil, and delightful grandchildren, Asim and myself, Yusuf. Gratitude from an often absent husband and father. Initially, he was hesitant when approached about this biography, as he did not consider his minuscule contribution to the struggle for equality to be of great importance. In addition, he felt that biographies should be written posthumously, in the event that the person falters after publication. In this biography, he has not reached this unfortunate scenario. As his grandson, I am grateful for the lessons that I have learned from my dada. The importance of selflessness, honesty, hard work, and compassion. These are of even greater significance during these times of conflict, not only in South Africa, but throughout the world. The biggest lesson we can learn in any of our interactions and actions is that even if we disagree with each other, we lose nothing by being kind to one another. Jazakallah to everyone who has helped out with the immense task of organizing this event, and for everyone for being able to be here with him today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yusuf, for that. It now gives me great pleasure to call upon my mentor, the CEO of Awqaf South Africa, Mr. Zainul Kaji, to do a short vote of thanks as we come to the close of the ceremony.
Jazakallah, Shaista. Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Namaste. Dumelang. I actually feel like a misfit here, with all the politicians around here, with the accountant coming up to, give a little bit of a discussion on what has just been happening. This is really an amazing person, awesome, extraordinary, incredible. I just don't have really words to describe him. I think people here have said enough about him. The only thing that I remember, I think during the SAIC days or the anti-tricameral days, where Dr. Jassat was in Indonesia, and I live in Indonesia, and he gave us so much of hope that freedom was going to come. And at a time when there was so much of turmoil around the country, post 1976, early 1980s, I think that was the time when, as people that have just maybe come back from university and people that have, just see what's going on, and our leaders like Rem Saluji, Dr. Jassat, and others who were really in the forefront of the liberation struggle. So I really would love to thank him and as a person who has inspired us to continue with the activism in different ways. Some of us are in social work, in charity work, and this is the legacy that Kes Saluji, Dr. Jassat, Essop Jassat, and many others have actually left behind for us to follow. But we thank people first before we thank Allah, and that is a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'd also like to thank Haroon Aziz for his contribution. I think this is a momentous contribution that he's made. The sacrifice, the hours and the years actually that has gone into the preparation of this book. In fact, at this juncture, I must actually thank Harun Kala, who took the initiative probably in 2010, just after we had the launch of Rem Saluji's book, where he made a commitment that this is the next book that is going to be done. So Jazakallah to Harun. We always say that when we do good, and the Quran reminds us about this, that when we do good, when we feed people, when we out there helping others, that we say we do not want a thank you, and we do not want a reward, and we do not desire this. And this comes from the words of Allah. And I think that Dr. Jassat and others within the organization really live by those values as well. So I'd like to thank all the panelists here who have contributed and who have really enlightened us this evening, and with the wonderful stories, of from childhood and adulthood that they've been through with Dr. Jassat. So Jazakallah, thank you to all of you. I would like to mention you by name: Sean Bolton, Dr. Vadi Prema, Enver Surti, N.G. Patel, our elder, Haroon Aziz as well. And with those few words, I'd like to say we'd like to announce a Waqf, an endowment in the name of Dr. Jassat and Auntie Shireen for an amount of 100,000 rands, which will go towards an endowment fund of their choice, whether it's been in education or in healthcare or any other poverty alleviation venture that they would want. I'd also like to thank all our volunteers and staff that have put this event together. I think a lot of time has gone into it, from Mikhail Collier, Hassanain, Ali at the office, and Petrochem, Shiraz, all the staff that have assisted here. I'd also like to thank Maulana Ashraf Dokrat for giving us that opening blessing, and I think that was very appropriate. The last, perhaps, concluding remarks is that we've heard all the good things about Dr. Jassat and the qualities that he actually was embedded in him, and that he was able to share with everybody else. We've asked him if he wants to say a few words. He's actually declined. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. Namaste. What can I say? It's been so wonderful to have you here this evening, to have taken you away from your chores to be present, to participate in this function. I have done nothing miraculous to this world. I was part of a community which was under siege, was being tortured, murdered, and I felt that that wasn't correct. And as a Muslim, I was taught to stand up for what is right, and that's all I did. I've done nothing marvelous. Many in this world have given their lives to the struggle. I only made a little contribution to bring about a change so that my people, my family, my countrymen would have a better life than I did in the past. Friends, a special thanks to the Awqaf Foundation who have sponsored this book. Had it not been for them, I don't think it would have been written. But initially, as I said, I felt that biographies should be written by individuals when they are alive to tell their stories. But autobiographies should never be written while they arrive, because in the priests, in the last dying days, they made mistakes, and the author might feel ashamed to have written good things about them. I'm a human being. I was taught to do medicine, and I was taught in those days that it's a service that you deliver. And then that's all I did. I need nothing. Shoemaker makes shoes, butcher sells meat. A doctor must do a service to his people. That's all I've done. And for that, thank you very much for having come along this evening. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah, Dr. Jassat. Really inspiring and really, I think, heartwarming for many of us here tonight. Just to continue further, in terms of some of the work that we are doing as well with this project of Leaders and Legacies, and we accept wholeheartedly that we should be doing more of these books for many of our legendary leaders. And we're really grateful also to Enver Surti here, our former Deputy Minister of Education, who initiated the Justice Muhammad project, or the Justice Project rather, and the book on the late Justice Ismail Muhammad, and also Hussein Ayub. So there were a few of those legendary leaders who are still, some of them still alive, who we were able to publish some of their books as well. But I think another area that we need to look at is just apartheid era stories. People on the ground, lay people, children, people that were not really actively involved in anything, but who suffered and who had who felt the impact of apartheid in their own lives. There may be doctors who could not actually practice at a white hospital, for example. They had to go to Paraguanas Hospital. There were people that had to be shut off from buses or couldn't sit on a park bench. People, for example, I remember in Petersburg, where I come from, we were not allowed to play in the park, and we were chased away from playing in the park. So those apartheid stories also need to come up. So in fact, anybody that has got those kind of stories, we'd like to document those stories, because for our future generations, we need to educate them about what has been happening in this country. So I think that's all that I have to say. Jazakallah khairan to everyone again. I'd like to call upon Qari Musa Sidat to now thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a closing dua.
اللهم صل على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام، حينا ربنا بالسلام وادخلنا دار السلام. تبارك ربنا وتعاليت يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم ثبتنا على الإيمان ومتنا على الإيمان واحشرنا يوم القيامة مع الإيمان بحرمة القرآن وبحرمة النبي آخر الزمان. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان وجعلنا من الراشدين وجعلنا من المتقين وجعلنا من الصالحين. اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وقنا عذاب القبر وقنا عذاب الحشر وقنا عذاب الفخر وقنا عذاب الدين واحشرنا يوم القيامة مع المتقين مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار يا رب العالمين. اللهم ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. قال الله تعالى في شأن حبيب: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم. مولاي صل وسلم دائما أبدا أبدا على حبيبك خير الخلق كلهم بفضل سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
MashaAllah. This brings us now to a close for the evening. Thank you all for honoring us with your presence once again and making this event a success. There will be refreshments provided hereafter, as well as a book signing by Mr. Haroon Aziz and Dr. Essop Jassat, should you wish to get your copy signed. Books are made available. Ali and Daneo will assist you with book sales. They're from Awqaf South Africa, and online through distributors like Ikra and Hikma distributors. They will also be available this week at exclusive books and bargain books, should you wish to purchase. So Jazakallah so much. Please drive safe and take care.
Can you ask Hamid Kalu to come and read this message?
Okay, we have Mr. Hamid Kalu who would like to recite something, read something. A message to Dr. Jassat.
On the occasion of the launch of the Compassionate Healer, Dr. Jassat, congratulations on this most wonderful achievement. The Compassionate Healer is a must for every home. It will serve as a source of inspiration and education to scores of people across current and future generations. What we do for ourselves dies with us. What we do for others and the world is and remains immortal. Albert Pine. On behalf of the Kalu family, we thank you, Dr. Jassat, for your generous friendship spanning more than 70 years. You have always made the time and effort to honor this friendship, as is evidenced by your involvement in our ongoing family matters, whether social or health related. Two specific incidents bring to mind your attendance in 1981 of the opening of the first Black-owned Ford franchise in the country, Kalu Ford, and more recently, the 7th birth celebration of Hamid. At both events, we were fortunate to have you say a few words. Your attendance, amongst other things, at a 1980 event even prompted an investigation by the special branch, security branch of the Apartheid state of the event. We appreciate and are extremely grateful to have you, a humble, selfless, ethical individual with numerous more exceptional qualities, as our friend and mentor. We acknowledge and are proud of your sacrifice and commitment, not only in treating and providing healthcare to many, many people, rich and poor, from all different race groups, from all across South Africa, but also for your strategic role in politics, which transformed this country from an oppressive to a free society. We are sad that our freedom has been captured by greed and corruption. We take this opportunity to hail you, Dr. Jassat, as an outstanding son of South Africa, a people's person that did good work without seeking fame and fortune. We make dua that Almighty Allah showers His most choicest blessings upon you and rewards you in abundance. We wish you good health, peace, and safety. Jazakallah from the Kalu family.
When we take care of each other, wonderful things happen. Children thrive, the elderly rejoice, communities celebrate. Awqaf South Africa, a charitable Waqf receiving organization, makes it easy to share the care. All donations are plowed into Sharia-compliant investments, while the fruits support a great variety of charitable causes. Visit the Awqaf South Africa website at awqafsa.org.za to discover how your Waqf can bless our community with the legacy of care. Awqaf South Africa, share the care.